Hello my scrumptious little top hatters and welcome to the new video. Before we start, a little shout out to the lovely people over at Elgato who have recently sponsored us. To celebrate this awesome collaboration, we'll be giving away one of their amazing stream decks. So if you want to take that streaming game to the next level, check out the link down in the description. I will also leave a link to their website, so if you want to check out their amazing products, then you can do that as well. Let it be known that most of the stuff I use, including the green screen, my capture card, and a bunch of other things, are Elgato products, so I can attest to their virtues and how good they are. Nidus, ladies and gentlemen, is the order of the day. And let me tell you, this one has been heavily requested by people over on the Twitch side of things. And I'm not going to lie, I didn't really want to make this guide too early on, as I've been focusing on the frames that are more heavily used, or at least the ones I find personally more interesting. But without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, jelly spoons, let me present to you Nidus! Nidus is a very interesting frame that boasts some very interesting passive traits as well as some very interesting visual flares to demonstrate the growing power of this beast of a creature. Then, as he begins using his abilities, he in turn starts building up his stacks of mutated power. As these stacks of mutation grow, as does the potency of survivability and damage within Nidus' playstyle. One of the most fundamental things about Nidus is that he is very adaptable and can be played in a rather wide variety of ways, often dictated by his augments. Whether that be solo, relying on the power of building stacks quickly, being able to methodically work your way through a map, or relying a bit more on range and being able to tug enemies from far away. Also being able to then heal with a very interesting designed fourth ability that, once placed, allows to spread infested gunk and worms and maggots and all sorts of nasty stuff all over the place, like a weird STD. This in turn isn't actually a bad thing, it actually benefits your allies, but it's weird when you think about it, because tentacles. Yeah, he's not exactly the most elegant creature on the planet, is he? One of the things that makes Nidus so loved is his sheer scalability, and although it does take a little bit of understanding to reach that potency and see him bashing in level 200 enemies, once you get past that initial hurdle of complexity and learning curve, with the balancing of stacks and mutation and synchronizing a good build to accommodate those stacks, then you find that regardless of playstyle, there won't be a single mission or game type in the game that can stand against you, and you can also then play supportive if that's your thing as well, but that's sort of a different story. Most people then play Nidus because he's absolutely destructive in everything he touches. But above all else, Nidus rewards aggressive and active play. Getting into the thick of things and pumping out your abilities gives you your stacks, and the more stacks you get, the more you do, and the more survivability you have. You'll see a trend with Nidus that allows him to surpass a lot of the barriers that a lot of frames would otherwise suffer against. And although there are some definite downsides with things like obtaining him, or maybe just not having that much versatility, not having as much uniqueness in the abilities. They all seem to look and feel somewhat similar, but that's what gives Nidus his appeal in some respects. So in that regard, some people would treat Nidus similar to Marmite or Vegemite if you're that way inclined. You either love him, or you hate him. Most people love him. Unless you like Vegemite, in which case you probably hate him. But who the heck likes Vegemite? I mean, really? Nidus is obtained in probably one of the more annoying quest chains in the game, and is also why a lot of people may be put off from playing him. This is due to the fact the quest to obtain him is the Glassed Gambit, which is only startable once you have finished the War Within. The quest chain itself is not all that complicated, as all it asks you to do is a differing variation of the index, which on its own isn't too hard, but if you do it solo, you may struggle, especially if you're newer to the game. So getting a group for this will be very, very useful, and you'll just need to execute it and listen to the instructions given to you, because some of these index missions, or quote-unquote index missions, will have some requirements for you to fill whilst you're doing them. And as if that wasn't bad enough, his components then drop from rotation C in the infested salvage mission called Austrius on Eris. This mission type is a bit of a interesting one. It's actually a copy-pasted mission type that came from the Jordis Verdict raid, which requires you to keep 3 nodes active at any given time. It's not necessarily that hard, but similar to farming Octavius Neuroptics from the Arcandelic Survival, it's a bit of a time sink. And it does mean that you're going to have to invest a lot of time to get a drop chance that is very low. On the rotation C, all of the components have a drop chance of 14.29%. So you're either going to get stupidly lucky and get them all in 3 attempts, like some people in my Twitch stream keep pointing out, or you're going to be me who takes 2 months to get the damn thing. Moving on to Nidus's abilities, starting with one of the most complicated passives in the entire game. It is incredibly intricate, as there are a lot of smaller breakdowns that need to be added into this to explain how this works in its entirety. So sit back and let's quickly go over what makes Nidus's passive so unique in the world of Warframe. First of all, the stacks. Hitting enemies with Virulence or Ravenous, which are some of his abilities we'll explain in a moment, will then gain stacks towards your Adaptive Mutation, which is his main passive. For each enemy hit, you will gain 1 nodule of a stack. Every 5 nodules will then give you a full stack of mutation. At certain levels of the mutation, starting at 3, 5, and 10, your appearance will then change. So at 3, you gain lovely looking shoulder guards. At 5, you then gain a fancy looking helmet, and then at 10, we just build up here a moment, you then look like something out of an anime. This is a lovely little visual variation that DE added to give a bit of a flair to Nidus, and especially if you have his deluxe skin, this looks gorgeous. For this to work, all that is needed is for the ability to actually contact the enemy, not necessarily deal damage, and to keep this in mind, some abilities will also cost stacks to use as well, but we'll cover more about that on the individual abilities as we cover them. You also have something in this passive called Undying, which allows Nidus to cheat death. If he were to take fatal damage, this in place of death consumes 15 stacks of your mutation, giving him invulnerability for 5 seconds. So if we unpause the AI here, we'll demonstrate this. The invulnerability will last for 5 seconds and put him back to 50% of his health. This can be rather dangerous, as if you don't get out of dodge with this when the proc starts, you can in theory have this proc over and over again until you completely run out of stacks. This is a great oh crud moment if you ever find yourself in a situation where Nidus can't for some reason get through and survive it with his unbelievable amount of survivability and regeneration abilities. Now Nidus has a couple of interesting other elements to his passive as well. Whereas most frames, as they rank up, gain extra stats towards their regular stat weights, Nidus has that as well as also having a couple of passives that start building up with his level. As you hit the following levels, you gain the following stats. Bearing in mind you still have them at lower level, they just get higher as you level. At level 26, or rank 26, sorry, Nidus will gain 50% armor. At rank 27, Nidus will gain 15% bonus ability strength. At rank 28, he will gain 200% bonus health. And at rank 29, he will gain 50% energy capacity. And at rank 30, he then gains 13 health per second, which will follow him through as he plays. Keeping in mind again that you still have those at the lower levels, that's just what they are at the highest level possible as they reach their highest rank. Moving on to the actual abilities, we've already had a mild demonstration of some of these, but I think it's worth going into as much detail with these as possible, as there is a huge amount of synergy between certain abilities here, and we want to sort of demonstrate them in that regard. Now, his first ability is called Virulence. This is an ability that sends out a wave of a narrow wave of infested gunk in front of Nidus for 16 meters, and will deal 200 damage initially, but benefits in damage from the number of stacks of mutation you have, and also refunds energy based on the number of stacks you have as well. The amount of energy regenerated is also based on the enemies struck. So if you hit enough enemies, you're likely never going to run out of energy in the first place. This is the bread and butter ability of Nidus, and will be what you use to build most of your stacks of mutation with, and can provide quite the nice amount of wave clear and damage, especially in choke points and narrow areas like corridors, whilst also having synergy with most of your other abilities too in some way or another. The damage of this can get a little bit on the complicated side, but for the sake of simplicity, all you need to know is to get the most potency out of this, you'll need a little over 130% power strength, and then mod range to let the wave travel further. This will deal a huge amount of damage, so focusing on Virulence efficiency is key to most builds. The augment for Virulence is called Teeming Virulence, and is in my mind, Nidus's best augment, but whether that's your best augment, it's entirely up to you, I suppose. This allows you to generate a buff when hitting 4 enemies, to give you 120% bonus weapon critical chance for 15 seconds, which will work incredibly well with crit-based weapons, such as Tiburon here. And this is a super powerful and great with synergy with your Virulence. The crit buff also benefits from ability strength, so seeing as you'll likely be building a lot of power strength anyway, this is very likely going to get very, very, very powerful as you start modding with Nidus. And in my mind, for most builds, especially for maybe smaller maps, be a mandatory thing if you have access to it, as the potency here is ridiculous. Lava is Nidus's too. Nidus flings a large snot ball of infested flesh to a location. Once arriving at said location, tendrils will shoot out and grab enemies within a radius of 15 meters and drag them into a massive man pile of weird awkwardness. Yeah. This is a strange one, but a very powerful ability, and can set up some great combos, as you'll find this will allow you to clump enemies together to hit with your one, to help build those stacks up super fast. So like this, for example, which, as you can see now, allows me to build up a stack, and if you use this with your other abilities, there'll be a lot of synergy there as well. Using this in synergy with your Virulence is vital and will likely be the core aspect of most Nidus rotations with abilities. You'll likely start an engagement with your 2 to clump enemies up, and then use your 1 to help build stacks and deal huge amount of damage to enemies that are clumped up in such a way. You'll then have a slight variance in this sort of rotation once you start incorporating your other abilities and the synergy therein. The grab radius of this ability is based on your ability range, and the duration they're grabbed for is based on ability duration. The augment for this is a rather fun one, and I kind of like this one actually. It's called Lava Burst. Once activated, you can reactivate your lava augment to explode, dealing 300 toxin damage in a 5-meter radius. This then stacks for every enemy grabbed, so more enemies grabbed, the more damage this will deal on its initial explosion. Another super powerful ability that can deal humongous damage when used in large clumps of enemies. This damage and range is then affected by ability strength and ability range to improve the potency. You'll find that with most Nidus augments, they are very strong, or at the very least fun to use, like this one. And to be fair, like fighting against level 90 enemies, getting 5 or 6 of these guys together in one clump, it's still more than enough damage to take away a good 50, maybe 60% of their health bar, to then have a good toxic proc on top of that. It's very powerful. You'll like this ability, trust me. Especially if you are making use of a range build as well. Definitely worth adding this in if you get the opportunity to. Moving on to Nidus's 3, which is called Parasitic Link. Now, this is one of the most useful and fundamentally core abilities within Nidus's repertoire. However, one of the least used in general play because nobody really fully understands it in most situations unless you've taken the time to actually figure out what it does. Parasitic Link is a must if you want to get the most out of Nidus. Using one mutation stack, Nidus will link himself to an ally within 40 meters, like so, which will also spread the space cancer to them as well, which will then develop after 7 days to produce a lovely growth on their neck. Ho ho, hee hee, ha ha. Or an enemy within 20 meters. This then lasts for 60 seconds total. While linked to an ally, both the Nidus and the party member gain a 25% power strength bonus, which will work immensely well, synergizing with other abilities such as your 1 and your 4. If linked to an enemy, he then diverts 50% of the damage dealt to him to the enemy he is linked to. This is amazing and will add a huge amount of survivability. The damage dealt to him, as well as stuns, knockdown, and status effects, are then affected to the enemy linked to. So picking a chunky boy to link to is highly advisable. Keep in mind, though, the damage redirection is affected by power strength and is capped at 90%. At a power strength of 180%. And while linked, the enemy is invulnerable to outside sources of damage and will only die once the link transfer deals enough damage to kill the target, or the Nidus decides to unlink and kill it themselves. Some synergy is to be had here as well with Virulence. If you cast Virulence whilst linked to a target, the linked target will then cause a second instance of Virulence to be cast towards the same location, allowing for even faster stacking of mutation because it will count as an individual cast and allow the same target to generate 2 stacks if struck by both you and the linked target. Ravenous is Nidus's 4. Nidus will consume 3 stacks of his mutation to spawn a large area of clumped, massy, infested stuff within an 8-meter radius around him, which will last for 40 seconds and regenerate 20 health per second to anyone stood in it. This area will also then spawn eggs that will hatch up to 9 maggots. These maggots will leap towards nearby enemies and stun them until the maggot dies or until the maggot is killed. These maggots will deal toxic damage per second, a very small amount of it. The number of maggots and damage the maggots do are not affected by power strength, however, and are just there to bolster the usefulness of crowd control and act as wardens to incoming enemies. However, the more mutagen stacks you have, the stronger the tick damage does become. The augment for this is called Insatiable. Whilst stood in the area of Ravenous, the Nidus then has a 60% chance to generate an additional stack of mutation. I'd say this is the least useful augment, but it can be nice if you're getting used to Nidus and want the comfort of being able to generate stacks that little bit easier. And, you know, if you're playing maybe a mission that's of high level where you want to build your stacks more efficiently so you can get to that level much quicker, then this can be very useful for that as well. And last but not least, we are on to the builds. Nidus is a little bit heavy on Former for definitely optimized builds, but we're going to go through some builds you can aim for, and then of course a build that will be much more easily attainable by a new player. As with every build, I would like to let you know that this is obviously personal preference. What builds work for me may not necessarily work for you. So, starting off, the Aura mod is entirely down to personal preference. Corrosive projection is always something I enjoy, so I use it a lot for that enemy armor reduction. Now, this build is the bread and butter build that will work in any situation at any given time. We are starting with a large amount of power strength to benefit the potency of our 4, as well as also the potency and damage of our 1. Again, the default amount of power strength you want at any given time is always 130% to make sure you get as much benefit from your Virulence as possible. So with our power strength, we have Power Drift, Blind Rage. Because you get that natural energy regeneration and energy feedback from your passive, you don't necessarily need to have much efficiency. So Blind Rage is actually really good for Nidus in this situation. You then have Intensify. And to really help with that energy regeneration, Hunter Adrenaline is also very good here because you are going to naturally be soaking a lot of damage. We then have a little bit of range from Stretch and a little bit of duration from Continuity. Doesn't need to be primed. This is obviously just because this is what the build I use. In terms of survivability, we have a lot of health right off the bat anyway, so using Vitality to boost that even further is always going to be very useful. Now, this adaptation could in theory be anything. You could in theory replace it with Steel Fiber or any other survivability mod if you so chose. Again, play with the builds, find what works for you. This is just a very good bread and butter build that works across the board. And now for the more new player friendly build, which also doubles as a augment build. And again, with this, I would point out that the primed mods and any prime mods we ever demonstrate are usually just replaced with default mods. These are just what I have access to me. This build and the augment build in general will pretty much set you back about 2 Former, which most Nidus builds will. Starting with a well-roundedness across everything with a bit of focus on power strength. We would then have one mod spot specifically dedicated to the augment. If you don't have the augment or you don't want to use them, this could then be replaced with either some more duration or some more survivability. It is entirely personal preference with this build. All of these mods, by the time you get to getting Nidus, unless you buy them with Platinum, are usually obtainable. Hunter Adrenaline could be replaced with Rage if you have it by that point. If you don't have Hunter Adrenaline or Rage, then you could just replace this with either more power strength or Streamline to help the efficiency, as this build does lack a little bit in that efficiency department, but only because you're then making up for it with the sheer amount of potency from the augments you would then replace it with. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all that you need to know about Nidus for a beginner's perspective. Again, these are beginner-friendly guides, and we do miss certain elements because we want to try and make sure a new player gets the best understanding possible. We might look at doing more advanced guides in the future once we've covered all the main frames, and we'll maybe come back to this again in the near future. Otherwise, I hope you'll enjoy this video. If you'd like to come and join us, like these amazing Victor volunteers that were joining me today, then we record these on Twitch, so you can join us as well. There'll be a link to that in the description below. And I would like to know what you think of Nidus. How hard is he to attain? Do you like him? Do you not like him? Do you like his augments? Let's have a discussion about Nidus in the comments, shall we? And I hope you all watch the next videos we put up. There's a lot of interesting things coming soon, including non-Warframe related videos. Shocker, I know. And hopefully we get to see you then. So thank you for watching, and I'll see all you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!